Hey everybody, this is Paul.
Hey everybody, this is Mark.
I was here probably 3 years ago. We'll link to the video down below. We'll briefly go over some of that history. I know I respect Paul for a couple of reasons. One is he has a vast knowledge of what's going on in the homeless sector and the history of how we got here. And today we're going to talk about 40 years of homelessness.
It's freaking amazing.
And the other is Paul will tell you the truth. He will tell you the blunt, honest truth. So let's talk about 40 years of homelessness.
Well, it was late 82 in some cities, but by 1983, the federal government, through FEMA, because this was a crisis and this was a temporary situation, started funding what they referred to, and of course United Way took its cut and did the process shit, but started funding what they referred to as temporary emergency shelter facilities. The temporary was the facilities were supposed to be temporary. And then here we are 40 years later, there's more unhoused community members than there's ever been. And they're talking about service-resistant people for not going into what was claimed to be temporary facilities because they're not humane for housing human beings. Hell, I don't know that they're humane for housing anything. But sure as hell, as a tier of housing in society, shelters are absolutely inadequate. And it wasn't lack of shelters that created homelessness. It was the elimination of affordable housing funding for housing that created homelessness. We've done everything but restore that funding that was eliminated. We've exacerbated the neoliberal approach to affordable housing development. We've privatized our public housing stock that's left. We've torn down and destroyed over 483,000 public housing units. And then we sit there and say, but wow, where's all this homelessness come from? It must be a lifestyle choice. There's systemic reasons why people ended up living ass out in the street. And we're not addressing that. We're only addressing the fact that we can see it. And if we see it, it's an issue. And if we see poverty, we have poverty in America. If we see homelessness, we have homelessness in America. It's not about the lives of the people that are suffering in poverty and homelessness. It's about the fact that I see it. Get it out of my sight, and we've solved the homeless problem. And that is just bullshit. And that is inhumane. It's ineffective. And forget the fact that it's expensive. I'm sick of hearing that shit. They've got plenty of money to lock us up. Look at our private prison systems. Look at how we're addressing mental illness in the country. We're seeing more and more efforts to reinstitutionalize mentally ill people. They always have money for oppression and colonization. It's only when it talks about humane standards of living, access to health care, access to education, then all of a sudden money's an issue. Like we fund through housing tax write-offs, through tax credits, we fund over $200 billion a year in the subsidizing home ownership in America. We do $40 billion a year in subsidizing housing for poor people, but it's the $40 billion we can't afford. The $200 billion is economic stimulus. So you can't use an economic argument to argue neoliberalism. You have to talk about the humanity of the individuals and the families that are living in our goddamn streets.
Could stop the video right there. I mean,
right.
you went.
In another 3 years, I'll see you again.
Yeah,
Cool.
That's what's really sad about this all. It's like it doesn't change. And one of the things that I've noticed recently, I was down in San Diego, and I don't know why San Diego really slapped me in the face, because I live in Los Angeles. We see homelessness everywhere, but there was something about San Diego, because in Los Angeles, it's usually like Skid Row is a warehouse
A
district.
catchment area.
You know, and exactly, it was intentional urban design. And San Diego, there's so many people outside. It was like, you're never going to house these people. So we're playing this numbers game that started when Reagan, when chronic homelessness and the homeless industry was created. We've been doing this numbers game instead of focusing on lack of affordable housing, racism, lack of a living wage, and all the other causes of homelessness.
Well, and that's where you have to get real about who's we. Like I would say those that have more power and clout, the neoliberal apparatus of our government and our corporate structure, like they have been focusing the agenda. We as organizers, we tend to fall into the trap. And there's way too many liberals that are fucking falling into the trap and start using point-in-time head counts, even though everybody in the streets will tell you it's the bullshit methodology to define the scope of the problem. And I hearken it back to Reconstruction and Jim Crow. Like, is you define the narrative and the public narrative of what homelessness is by demonizing homeless people, just like they did during Reconstruction to African American community members. And it's the power elites that define us as service resistant, there by choice, from somewhere else, dangerous. And then they're able to start picking us off and doing shit like 4118 in LA, or doing the camping bans, or making it illegal to sit on a sidewalk. Who the hell's going to go to jail for sitting on a sidewalk except a poor person or an unhoused community member? And then bringing in the private security systems and the urban alchemies of the world. Like, it's all about our presence is making them repulsed. Yeah. And the ugly laws of the 1800s are alive and well again, folks, because that's what it is. We think you are unsightly, and that's exactly what the ugly laws said back in the day. We are reliving our colonial history today, and it's playing out in the arena, as the most visible play of it is in the arena of homelessness, but it's the same as what's happening with transgender folks and with killings by the cops of African Americans, choking the brother on the subway. Like, this is getting really fucking scary, and people that are claiming to care about the issue and making good money at the nonprofit or whatever need to be willing to say, this is a fight for life. This is a fight for humanity, and I don't care what I gotta risk in order to join that fight. I'm going to join the fight because it's the right fight to be in. And quit saying thank you to a politician for meeting with you. That's your fucking job. Now you better start listening to us.
Like I said, he's honest.
Instead of just meeting with us. They'll meet with you till you're blue in the face, and you start thinking it's important that you get access to go to the meeting, and that becomes more important than the content of what's being discussed at the meeting. And that's the game that's got to stop.
Pallet Shelters have a 7,000 increase in business.
Yeah. And so does private security.
So
does outreach.
I got to thank Peter White for this, is that, Pete White said their shacks meant for lawnmowers, but we're now seeing businesses, not just pallet shelters. There's people that are creating these little internment camps, and then they're lobbying for politicians to create more laws so that they can grow their business. And it's...
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. Look at 501c3. Like look at United Way. Look at Salvation Army. Look at how we've addressed poverty in this country since the whole corporate foundation and nonprofit structure was created in the 60s during the war on poverty. When the government really wants to kill a revolution, they fund it. And they set up a funding structure so that we live off of the charity and donations of others. And they deemed that poverty cannot be addressed with political activity. It's only a matter of direct service activity. And then we get this shit where doing well by doing good, how to make money by setting up a foundation, theoretically to give out money.
Get everybody fighting for the same scraps.
We have to understand the neoliberal context of addressing poverty. it does us no good to think that we can take the current structure that's being applied to issues of racism and classism in America and use that structure to change racism and classism in America. We have to be willing to fight to change that structure. And the first step would be change the goddamn priorities. You're not going to address poverty and racism and classism and disabledism. You're not going to address that with charity. So just throw that shit out the window and start getting real about addressing the causes of this shit. And that's where the colonial attitudes and the neoliberal attitudes pop up. You can't ignore them. You start looking at our history, like I mentioned, the ugly laws. That was 1867, and it lasted till 1970s. And it literally said, if we find you to be so diseased and mutilated as to be unsightly, we can throw your ass in jail. How is that different from loitering or sitting on the sidewalk or being in a park? It isn't.
I learn so much every time I sit next to you.
I make this shit up, but I'm old, so people think I know what I'm talking about.
But you're spot on. So you kind of transitioned a little bit. What do? How do we, it's getting worse.
We build a base where we're hanging out and building alliances and allegiances with organizations that can, with accountability, use the word we. And we don't go for self-identified leaders. We don't go for token representation of a class of people. We don't say, well, there's 2 homeless people at our meeting, so now we can say, no. We build an organizing base that is of and accountable to the community that we're in, and then we use that methodology to build connections with each other, and we build power on our own. We don't look for anybody else to validate our existence. We're not messaging to the general public. Like, if the people living in the streets don't look at what rap is putting out and say, yeah, well, at least they know what the hell they're talking about, then rap needs to shut the fuck up. Because the accountability comes from the common threads in what people are telling you, and then respecting and responding and uplifting those messages that you see. And the national groups need to wake up, the state groups, the local groups, like this whole goddamn, okay, what's the newest trend? So I'll start talking about chronic homeless. What the fuck is chronic homeless? Like that's not a disease. Like, they're human beings. And we go from poor to extremely poor to whatever poor. We go from hungry to food challenged. We take families and youth and we say they're not homeless enough. They're just poorly housed because they're couch surfing or sleeping on somebody's floor. Like, where the fuck does this come from? It doesn't come from talking to the community. We don't separate ourselves, but it creates conflict amongst us because now I'm no longer a priority one and you're a priority over I'm a priority, and there's 18 priority categories and there's managed intakes and there's these whole systems of managing poverty and oppression, as opposed to overturning poverty and oppression and having a system that treats everybody like they're goddamn human beings. Because you know what? In reality, that's what the fuck we are.
Well said. Everything. Always. So, how do people support you?
Be nice to it. No, what do you, Western Regional Advocacy Project. It's WRAPHOME, WRAPHOME.org. You'll see all of our research. If we got a mouth like we got, you better have the facts to back it up. You'll see this amazing report that House Keys Action Network in Denver just put out of 800 people's feedback about housing issues of unhoused community members. Like, there's systems of accountability that are out there that can be duplicated very easily and don't take a lot of money, just take some time and learn about the shit. Come to our website, hit us up with an email, ask us questions, but be building power. And not your own power, and not your agency's power, your community's power. And you'll get what you need to get by, but you'll be building power for the community as a whole. And then we'll hang out, and our parties kick ass. You know, We know, like, you get your butt kicked as much as we do. You better know how to party. So, like it's no joke, you know. And it ain't a revolution if you can't dance to it. So we firmly believe in that shit.
That should be your byline.
No, that's somebody else's already. I would be stealing it. Well, plagiarism.
See,
is cool.
honest. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you for having me. Or you came to my shit, so thank you for being here.